Welcome to Fantasy Subgenres Explained, a new series on the channel where I'm going to do a deep dive into fantasy and discuss a specific subgenre. I'll be giving its history, as well as talking about its purpose, and giving examples of some of the best books that subgenre has to offer, as well as some lesser known, more hidden gems. Today, we're talking all about portal fantasy, also known as Isekai in Japan, and I'll have a whole section later on in the video just talking about Isekai because there's a lot to talk about there as well. So you may be wondering, what is portal fantasy? I mean, it basically describes itself. It involves characters traveling through a portal from our real world into some magical fantasy realm, what J.R.R. Tolkien would refer to in his essay on fairy stories as a secondary world. The definition of portal can vary, with some people arguing that there needs to be an actual physical gateway of some sort to this unique world, while others might count a hidden city that's invisible to everyone else as portal fantasy. But I mean, whether it's a train station, a wardrobe, a tornado, you get the picture. But is portal fantasy simply escapism with no other benefit than just entertainment, as some people seem to believe? I'm gonna discuss all of that, but before I dive into the magic of portal fantasy, we have been blessed with a sponsor. This video is sponsored by Magicspoon. So I am a big fan of the breakfast revolution that is Magicspoon. They've sponsored the channel a few times now. I always love working with them because I love their breakfast cereal. It's the perfect option for me. I'm trying to eat gluten-free and eat less sugar, and their cereal has just been the perfect breakfast option. However, I am super excited to announce that they have a new treat, Magicspoon Treats. These are just like the marshmallow treats you enjoyed as a kid, but with only 1 gram of sugar and 1 to 2 net carbs. They're only 130 calories, and they are packed with 11 grams of protein. These have similar nutrition to leading protein bars, but they're delicious and fun. They're a really great pre or post-workout fuel, or just anytime snacking. These are the best high-quality, high-protein way to satisfy your sweet tooth. You can click the link below to try Magicspoon's new treats today, and be sure to check out both delicious and high-protein flavors, marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter. Whether you like sticking to the classics or trying something new, there's a flavor you'll love. And just like with their cereal, Magicspoon is so confident in their product that they're backed by a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen and enter the code captured in words for $5 off. Or go to magicspoon.com/capturedinwords to save $5 on your order today. And don't forget to add the marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter treats to your order. And for my fellow Canadians and my British fans, Magicspoon also ships to Canada and the UK. Big thank you to Magicspoon for sponsoring the video. Now, portal fantasy is one of the oldest subgenres of fantasy, with some legends about travelers between realms in Viking mythology, or journeys to the land of the fairies in Celtic myths being viewed as early portal fantasies. I guess in a way, even a lot of underworld myths could be considered as this. Individuals, mortal or otherwise, traveling to the other side in order to complete a quest or visit or rescue a loved one. Now, as I was doing research for some of the earliest examples of portal fantasy, I came across a story called The Description of a New World, called The Blazing World, which was better known simply as The Blazing World, and it was published in 1666. It's a work of prose fiction by the English writer Margaret Cavendish, who was the Duchess of Newcastle. And I found Blazing World to be so interesting. This is like a satirical utopian kingdom that can be accessed via the North Pole. According to novelist Stephen H. Propp, it is the only known work of utopian fiction by a woman in the 17th century, as well as an example of what we now call proto-science fiction. Now, basically, it involves a young woman who's kidnapped and brought to a world that's inhabited by talking animals. There's different stars in the sky, and she's unexpectedly made the Empress of the Blazing World. And in the final section, the Empress acts in the role of a military leader, clothing herself in jewels and special stones that give her the appearance of a deity. And she organizes an invasion back into her world, complete with submarines towed by the fishmen and the dropping of firestones by the birdmen to confound the enemies of her homeland. I found it to be such an interesting piece of history in fiction that I never knew about. However, when you think of portal fantasy, there's a handful of classic books that first come to to mind. In 1865, Lewis Carroll brought us his whimsical masterpiece, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which is considered one of the first and most famous examples of portal fantasy. And of course, it takes readers on a surreal journey as Alice tumbles down a rabbit hole into a bizarre world filled with eccentric characters and nonsensical landscapes. The story's dreamlike quality blurs the line between reality and fantasy. Alice gains confidence and learns to stand up for herself, refusing to be intimidated by the strange and unusual creatures that she meets. And the whole story can be seen as a child on a quest for her own identity and growth. For some understanding of logic and rules, the games that adults play, the concept of time, and even learning about death. And then of course there's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, where Dorothy and her dog Toto are swept away by a cyclone and find themselves no longer in Kansas, but in Oz, where an unforgettable journey to the Emerald City follows. Now, the groundbreaking success of both the original 1900 novel and the 1902 musical prompted Baum to write 13 additional Oz books. And there is some seriously weird stuff that happens in those books, like when Dorothy and company are mildly inconvenienced by a civilization made entirely out of wood, an entire culture of living, intelligent wooden creatures that prevent the heroes from progressing on their way. So what do? They burn the entire place to ash and continue on merrily. And yeah, a bit of casual genocide is only one of the many oddities of Oz. In 1911, we got our first appearance of Peter Pan in a book titled Peter and Wendy, and being transported to the fantastical world of Neverland, where Peter never grows up and his adventures with the Lost Boys, the pirates, fairies, and other magical creatures is always going to be iconic. However, my favorite classic children's example of this subgenre is the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, first published in 1950. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the most well-known of the portals found in the story, and what child hasn't crawled into a closet or wardrobe and wished they could find another world on the other side? But if you continue reading, you'll also find children swept away through a painting and simply by the winds felt on a cliffside. In The Magician's Nephew, Lewis wrote about the world between the worlds as this forest with a multitude of ponds, each of which led to a world if you jumped in. And reading this as a kid, I remember dreaming of jumping into one of those ponds. Which leads me to talk about escapism. Now, one of the primary purposes of fantasy is escapism, to escape through hidden doors into realms of magic and adventure. It's a great way to break away from life's burdens and just exercise your creativity and sense of wonder. But that's just one side of fantasy. It's not all just a pleasant diversion. Now, portal fantasy may seem like the perfect form of escapism because the characters are literally escaping their world. But you'll see that it's not just about the escape, but about the start of a new thought process or the beginning of a quest. Academic and historian writer Farah Mendelssohn says the portal fantasy is about entry, transition, and negotiation. The portal takes the protagonist and reader from where they're comfortable and drops them into a place of confusion and uncertainty, where they must discover how to negotiate their new presence. It's moving the reader between the known into a place of fantastic unknown. We're as lost as the characters are, and so we can easily slide into that character's shoes and grow with them and discover this strange new world together. When the Pevensey children enter Narnia, escaping World War II on Earth, they don't know what to expect in this new land on the other side, and neither do we. Every portal to a new world opens up a new process in your mind. You're starting from the beginning. And really, this isn't about escaping our problems, it's about rethinking them and our abilities and learning how to cope. The Pevensey children are tossed from one world war into another, the war going on in Narnia. If the story was meant to simply function as escapism, then it would place the children in a much safer place. But instead, their adventures in Narnia reveal to the children their own strengths, and that even though they're children, they can make a difference in the world. They weren't able to truly escape their world, but instead were given the tools to see all their problems from a different angle, and themselves in a more courageous light. So yes, any form of fantasy can act as escapism, but it's often escape that encourages you to refresh your way of thinking, to continue the difficult life ahead. You see, portals don't take you away from your problems. Typically, they land you in even bigger problems. Sometimes these are exaggerations of the ones you face in the real world, so that you're forced to realize that you have the ability to overcome them. Neil Gaiman's Coraline is another great example of this. Coraline feels like her parents don't understand her and they don't have time for her, and her strange neighbors seem to be obsessed with themselves. She finds a door in her new house that is a portal to another dimension, where her other mother and other father do care for her. It seems like the ideal life. However, that new world is actually a trap created by the other mother, who it turns out to be very terrifying. Anybody else have long-lasting trauma from this? And to live here permanently, she must give up her soul. This dimension is an illusion of sorts, and she realizes that she must destroy her escapism before it takes over her life and even the real world. Coraline may feel a little overlooked, but her life isn't bad, and Gaiman shows us that we shouldn't try to live in denial and escape our real-life situations forever because it's dangerous and can cost everything. Now, obviously, he's not trying to say that escapism is bad, but that we just need to take care with how we interact with it in our real life. And I think this is a really important lesson to remember, to not stray too far into escapism. Another really great portal fantasy by Neil Gaiman is Neverwhere. Neverwhere takes place between two cities that mirror each other, London above, the regular city of London, and London below, which is invisible to the eyes of the upper Londoners. Now here, it's not exactly a physical door that brings our protagonist to London below, but a mysterious woman that's named Door. Now, London below might not be some entirely alien secondary world, but there's many phenomenons that are beyond the laws of nature here. It is kind of bizarre, in particular the floating market that's constantly moving. It's a very strange place where the forgotten and invisible, the people who fell through the cracks in the world, now inhabit. Anyways, Richard's journey through all of his trials that he faced in London below, he's able to gain knowledge and form his own character. And really, it's pretty ironic because to begin with, he was kind of a nobody. His fiancée treated him like a nobody, and that's probably why he was able to slip through the cracks into London below. But he ends up gaining the courage to face reality, and he's gained a sense of his own identity. And ultimately, he decides which place he better fits in. In 1984, Guy Gavriel Kay brought us the first book in the Fionavar Tapestry. I always have a hard time pronouncing that name. And this is kind of like a classic portal fantasy with a pretty stereotypical high fantasy world. But as all Guy Gavriel Kay's works, it is incredibly ambitious and very beautifully written. The story follows 5 men and women who find themselves pulled into a fantasy world where they each have important roles to play. And this is definitely adult portal fantasy all around. Kay dives into some pretty dark themes throughout the series. Paul's grief in the first book was a huge thing for me, and learning how to process it. I just found that such a fascinating aspect of the book. Really, Guy Gavriel Kay is an author that I think deserves more attention, and this is a book that can be compared to Tolkien's work in a lot of ways. Now, I can't forget to mention the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire. Now, Seanan McGuire has created a series that not only features portal fantasies as the primary premise of all of the books, but each book does a deep dive into the types of people who walk through these magical doors. There are so many doorways and so many unique worlds in this series. To distinguish them, instead of directions like north, south, east, and west, the portal worlds are divided into nonsense, logic, wickedness, and virtue. Now, the places that she creates are where these kids feel like they have no constraints on their self-expression. They're places for kids to form or embrace their own identities. And I really enjoyed how this series explores how the children react when they return to the real world. It touches on how different people deal with their pain. While one character might see some significant growth, another might be unable to move past their trauma. Now, I should definitely mention Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This was one of my favorite reads of the year, and Piranesi's cover depicts a satyr that kind of evokes Mr. Tumnus from the Chronicles of Narnia, and it begins with an ominous epigraph from the magician's nephew. "I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept, who is doing the experiment. Of course, I need a subject to do it on." Now, like the Fantasies in Narnia, Piranesi has been behind the wardrobe for a long time, long enough for him to forget that he was once a citizen of Earth. And here we follow a character living a very lonely life in the maze-like halls of a mysterious world that he calls the House. This is a surreal portal fantasy that kind of subverts the entire subgenre. This is not a magical world of talking animals where personal limitations are overcome. No, it's a very lonely place that's more of a prison than anything else. Though being ignorant of your prison makes it not so bad. Now, The Never-Ending Story is a classic that definitely deserves a mention. I actually never read the book, but I did grow up watching the movies. And I'm sure they're very accurate to the books, right? I also think the graphic novel series Amulet deserves a mention. It follows two young kids who move into the strange house of their deceased great-grandfather, and they end up finding a different world through a door in the basement as they embark on a journey to find their mother. Next up is The Axe of Cain by Matthew Stover. Now, this is a really interesting series. It's partially set in the not too distant future where people of Earth send actors to the overworld, a planet that exists in an alternate dimension. And they do this for the entertainment of the masses. The main concept being that these actors blend in, they go on quests and treasure hunts, etc. Now, the person playing Cain is a brutal assassin and fighter and the most successful living actor. His estranged wife is stranded and lost in the overworld, and in order to get the ruling caste to help rescue her, he must kill the God Emperor. It's a really interesting series that I've only just been diving into, and I want to read more. The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen Donaldson. This is an adult portal fantasy where Thomas is an anti-hero who doesn't believe he really is in the world that he ends up in. It's a really wonderful world that Mr. Donaldson created, and many of the characters are extremely memorable, but it has very dark and bleak themes. I mean, the protagonist is very depressing and he complains a lot, and it follows a character arc that focuses more on loss than it does on gain, which is extremely unusual in fantasy. It's not really a series that's going to work for everyone, but it was incredibly ahead of its time, and I still really enjoy them. The His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman explores parallel universes, especially in book 2. And so this one could also be considered portal fantasy as well. I mean, the setting of the books kind of changes as the story progresses. And through her adventures across the various universes, Lyra gains valuable lessons and the needed experience to move on to the next stage of her life. Now, for a modern example of a pretty trendy series, The Darker Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. Here, not only do we see a character from our world traveling to a parallel world, or a parallel London to be exact, but multiple parallel versions of London. Now, unfortunately, while I do love the concept behind this series, I read all 3 books and ended up being kind of disappointed. It was a big letdown for me. Nothing really landed, and I felt like there's a lot of plot holes and conveniences and a character that I found to be very cringy, and I feel like there is so much more potential with the story. It could have gone in so many different ways. Anyway, I do know there's a lot of people out there that love these books though, so it's worth checking out if it sounds like something you'd be interested in. Lev Grossman's The Magicians is another popular series that's very dark. It's definitely for adults. It's kind of like a revisionist take on portal fantasy. From what I hear, people seem to either love this series for its creativity or hate it because the characters can be kind of insufferable jerks. I don't know yet because I haven't read this book, so I can't give my full opinion. It also has a TV adaptation, which I've really been meaning to check out, but I do want to read this book first. In 1963, at the height of the sci-fi craze, Andre Norton wrote a story that started in our world with a desperate fugitive, Simon Tregarth, forced to give all his money to a sort of Kabbalistic mad scientist for access to a portal that will take him to a world attuned to him. He ends up landing in Witch World, a medieval-like planet where magic belongs to women. Now, the story is a hybrid of science fiction tropes and sword and sorcery, but Witch World is a portal fantasy that still has a small cult following. Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is a classic, and it's pretty much just what the title sounds like. A Yankee man finds himself in the Arthurian world, where he tries to teach everyone technology, and it's incredibly satisfying to see a guy go back to Camelot's time and uses engineering knowledge and historical knowledge to become a total boss. Now there is a ton of Portal fantasies I wasn't able to cover in this video, so make sure to leave all of your favorites down in the comments. Now, I'm gonna talk about Isekai, but really I could make a whole separate video on Isekai because there is a lot to cover here. The term Isekai means strange world in Japanese, and it refers to a subgenre of fantasy where characters are transported to a fantasy world. Now, the concept of Isekai has roots in ancient Japanese literature. In particular, the story of a fisherman, Urashima Taro, who saves a turtle and is brought to a wondrous undersea kingdom. But Isekai has gained massive popularity in anime, manga, and web novels. And Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away is by far one of my favorite examples. Young Chihiro ends up trapped in the spirit world, her parents transformed into pigs for stealing from the spirits, and robbed of her name and memories, she tries to return home. Chihiro must discover her own strength and count on some friends that she makes along her journey. This is a masterfully done coming-of-age story, and it's a movie I grew up watching and rewatching, and I still love to this day. Now, there are plenty of isekai out there. Some recent releases can be repetitive and boring power fantasies, but others are true gems. ReZero, starting life in another world, is another great example. Here, the hero winds up in a world full of magic, but he only gains the power to return to life at a certain checkpoint in his journey every time he dies. And then there's Ascendance of a Bookworm. This is a Japanese fantasy light novel series where a book-loving post-secondary college student and soon-to-be librarian ends up crushed to death beneath a pile of books at her house during an earthquake. With her dying last breath, she wishes to be reincarnated in a world where she can read books forever. Which, like, yeah, I can relate. There's plenty of other great series out there like The Faraway Paladin, Overlord, and The Rising of the Shield Hero. Now, lit RPGs have become increasingly popular as well, and these can kind of be considered a Portal fantasy, with characters entering a fantasy world by putting on a VR headset, or literally being transported into a game world. Dungeon Crawler Carl is my favorite lit RPG series, and it's a genre I want to explore more of. At some point, I'll make a full subgenre explained video just on lit RPGs. And that is the first episode of Subgenres Explained. Let me know what you thought. I put a lot of time and effort into this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. And also leave your suggestions in the comments for what subgenre you would like to see me make a video on next. I'm also working on some world building explained videos where I dive into a fantasy world and talk all about its history and everything. So that's something you can look forward to in the future as well. If you want to join a welcoming community of fantasy lovers, then make sure to join my Discord server. Also, if you love these videos that I'm making and you want to help support the channel, then the best way to do that is through my Patreon. All of that support helps me be able to make these videos faster and be able to make this my full-time job. And I appreciate that so much because it takes a lot of time to put these videos together. I want to give a special shout out to my top tier patrons, Jacob Blair and Josh from Red Fury Books. You guys are awesome.